I was able to, because my friend qualified for the Phoenix Open, spend 2 days. Very intimate look at what goes on inside the tournament and the tour. And it was a very interesting session, so there's some good material here to cook with. And I may need paper and the keyboard for this one, because this might get a little complicated. And but I thought I'd get it down while I was in the process of thinking it through, rather than coming to some conclusions and just kind of stating those, right? So you get a peek into the process, what goes inside the little brain. And so you get to watch, a friend who's a good golfer. He's a professional, but he's on the developmental tours, right? And you start to understand, one, why there's now 3 levels of developmental, or 3 levels of tours, because there's so many talented people out there. Every day, there's a bunch of them where I practice, and they're all amazing, technically, athletes. And in the old days, you just needed one developmental tour and then the main tour, but now there's so many players, they have to divide it up. And it's interesting how they've done that. Like the lowest level tours, you have to have the mechanics. I mean, you have to be a real quote golfer to get in. And it's about whether you can win somehow. Whatever your strengths are, can you win? Scramble, bomb it, super putting, whatever it is. It's about, can you win and finish the job and those kinds of things, And the second level is really about, can you putt? Because you don't want to show up on the tour if you can't putt. And I got to see all this in action. It's really fascinating how it's stratified. These guys that run the tour, they're very, very smart. If you look at it purely as, you're producing a product. Gladiators, spectators, brands, all out of a chunk of desert and hitting a white ball around. It's quite unbelievable. So you wouldn't just take any chances, right? So the guys that make it to the tour, they've made the first 2 grades. And, they can perform. Because if you can't putt, you can't stay there. It's pretty unbelievable what they have to do. And then I started to also think about, okay, so, what does it mean to be on the tour? You got to be able to putt. That's a prerequisite, right? And basically it is on the hardest golf courses on earth that they can tweak up and grow the rough and stick the pins in all kinds of places and make the greens like wood, like plywood, and super fast and all rolly and hilly and all that. That you got to be able to basically, no matter what, headache, bad day, cat got run over, wind, acts of God, you can shoot par. And that's the simplest way to just describe it. No matter what, no excuses. You can get around in par every single day. Imagine, that's all you had to do. You had to shoot par, right? No one would have to shoot 16 under or 20 under. You just got to shoot par every day, no matter what. Feel good, sick, you gotta shoot par. So it's funny how it comes full circle to give the game meaning again at the highest level, in that, after being good as an amateur in university, and you're already shooting whatever under par, and you go to these development tours and you're shooting 15 under, and then to win on this next one you got to shoot 27 under and whatever. You go to this place where it's not about how low you can go, but it's whether you can shoot par every day. And then, statistically statistics and quantum mechanical variations and various religious forces, whatever you want to call it, just take care of the rest, kind of. I mean, I'm sure there's more fine layers above that, but at the macro level, that's what it means. That's the badge. That's why you get a courtesy car and get to drive up to the clubhouse and they open the doors for you, right? Because you can shoot par every single day. So it's kind of very interesting because, the takeaway from this is, take players who have been focused most of their career on mechanics, right? Practice, mechanics, and then competitive experience and all of that. And if you think about it, at least through the collegiate level and probably also through the first developmental level, that alone, separates the cream from the rest of it, right? So it's kind of the pinnacle of your skill development. I mean, almost, before you come into the third level of the tour, and definitely when you leave, with the exception maybe putting. And I'm not sure that's skill or reading or I don't know. We'll figure that one out. So, and also what's interesting though is, most people never get a taste of the tour until they get there. But to be at the third level and then get to play in probably the most intense environmental conditions on the tour itself, that's an amazing learning opportunity, like you've been to the future, right? So if you have that opportunity, you would be crazy not to analyze the crap out of it and figure out, okay, let's go back to the present, to the third level. We've been to the future, right? What do I have to work on? Because you can win a lot of ways, right? Hit it further, get more lucky, get more sleep, get better caddies. I mean, there's a zillion things. But you have to ask yourself, okay, if I'm smart and efficient about this, what are the 3 things I got to learn? With which I can also have to win, at the third level and win at the second level. But instead of wasting any time, what would you do? And so that becomes an interesting question choice problem. We were talking about this last night, about decision making. And so that becomes this interesting problem. And if you look at how players have their world structured, there's a player, and then kind of stacked on top is the coach and some sports psych guy and some agent / manager guy, right? And they kind of don't work for the player, even though they should. And they definitely don't crosstalk very much, okay? So if you look at it from an organizational configuration, it's not a good-looking one. And so if you put your hat on as if the unifying force of those 3 things on top of the player, right, dimensions, and look at it in an integrated fashion, some interesting things start to emerge, right? So, you slide those 3 away. I mean, they're there, right? Because in essence, they represent, the body, which is the swing and mechanics, and the emotional component, which is the sports psychologist, and the thinking part, right? Which is supposedly the agent / manager. And but if you integrate those and look at it from a common point of view that encompasses all 3, you come to some interesting conclusions. For instance, you have to learn the swing all over again, the game. I mean, it sounds ominous at first, but if you really think about it, this player, and most players, have basically learned the game from a mechanical kind of body point of view, and they haven't looked at it from kind of an emotional point of view, because the mind, the body, and the emotions are tightly connected. I mean, they all are, right? Body, mind, there's a connection, and mind, emotion, there's a connection. And so if you want to integrate the emotional part, as let's say the complement on the axis, right, to, the mechanics and body. You basically, unless you've explicitly gone through this process in a, kind of a systematic way, it's just random. So imagine that you would have to rebuild your swing from an emotional point of view, and your game from an emotional point of view, which is incredibly interesting, right? Because people don't typically do this. I mean, sports psychs don't do this thing. They just fix stuff. And players don't have usually, other psych people or neuro people or things like that. But if you think about it, and you just completely lay out the game from an emotional point of view, you want to be Spock, right? From the time you get there to the time you're done, you're just Spock. And your memory bank is good for basically just the present. It has no historical memory, and it has no instructions or ideas of what to do other than the task at hand. I mean, that would be like the neutral baseline. And then the first skill that you would want to learn, okay, unlike learning by body, since this is the emotional one. I mean, of course, there's the part of what to do before the round, because from an emotional point of view, you have to do certain things. You can't just show up and just deal with the physical body, which most people do. You have to deal with the emotional part too, right? If you want to be Spock. So you're in the Spock zone. You're on the first tee. The first shot, of course, is important. So the first mechanical part, analog, is the drive from an emotional point of view. And it's got all kinds of interesting components, right? So like, first of all, you need to hit it in the fairway, period. If you hit it in the rough, yeah, on the developmental tours you can get away with it. You're in trouble. And you're okay if you hit it there, but if you haven't mastered being Spock, the snowball starts there. So the first ball, first tee, super important, and first ball on every hole is super important. You just got to hit the fairways, which then therefore brings into, how do you do that, and what equipment do you use? I mean, I understand now why, like Tiger and a lot of these people, Ricky Fowler, I mean, they play shorter length shafts on their driver because they figured this out. I mean, when you're young, you want to pound the ball, okay? It's an awesome feeling. Even when you're old, it's an awesome feeling. And the nice thing about pounding the ball is if you get pissed off, you just pound the ball. It just kind of releases that and you feel good, And so pounding the ball becomes a mechanism to kind of achieve some kind of emotional state, as opposed to just a means of just maintaining neutrality. And there are certain personalities that definitely don't do this, but if you're a pound the ball type of person who's typically longer than everybody else and, it sounds good and feels good and their identity is attached to that, then they're also susceptible to this potential issue. So you have to unattach yourself from distance and attach yourself to accuracy when you relearn the game from an emotional point of view. And you make the equipment changes you need, and you do the emotional psych modulations, the neuromodulations, so that you're able to maintain this neutral Spock level in the event that, it doesn't go right. Because, it's a probabilistic game, right? So I think the best guy on the tour is like 87% or 85% hits the fairway. Jim Furyk. Doesn't drive it very far. Always in the fairway. And so, it's just about being in the fairway. It's being in the fairway in the right spot. If you just want to finish the job, you're never closer than, your sweet wedge distance ever. And if you're in trouble, you just get yourself back on the fairway, right? Because you're just trying to shoot par. And so you start to think about the pro tour game as a par game, and then work backwards and start to rebuild it from on an emotional plane to complement the mechanisms that you've already mastered in the kind of body mechanics frame, because there's connections, right, from the emotional state. So if you're angry or you're nervous or whatever, I mean, certain parts of your body tighten up, energy moves up and down your chakras, breathing changes, all kinds of things change. And so if there were to be any swing changes to make, you would make those in this rebuild process, changes that increase stability and is less emotionally vulnerable. And there are a few, right, that basically affect synchronization, right? And if you watch the patterns, you can see it when they go right and they go left, because there's some correlation to emotional state or need to control, or which are all fear-based, right? And results in lower ball flights, and then the ball spins off the green. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting permutations of this. But the fact is that the body, like where your chakra is centered, makes a big difference in which parts of your bodies move. And so if you're in the smog state, I don't know what the right chakra point is, but you want to be in that state, not just, from a mechanical position, but from an emotional position. So, that's the first change, So it's driver, fairway, equipment changes, psych changes, whatever else, intention changes, all kinds of stuff. Feed into that. But that alone gets you a long way down the road. Because then, if you can do that, and do that with discipline, which means in the right places, the right distances, then you're on to the next part, which is really the discipline with which you hit from the fairway to the greens. Because, it's not a birdie fest anymore. You're just trying to make pars, right? So you got 18 holes, and you figure out, on which half the holes, let's say. It's probably a little bit less than that, but that's about right. On half the holes, I'm going to go for a birdie. If the course will give it to you, maybe, you just got to look at where the pins are. And if not, then you hit to a safe spot, okay? And, the safe spot's basically a dot on the green where you draw a circle of a certain radius and you aim for the dot, and your normal error, will stay within that circle. So if it's 4 yards, then you make a circle 8 yards wide and you put the dot so that the far edge of the other circle never goes into a bad area, right? And you just play that way. And when you can go at the pins, right? From not only where they're located, but also, how close you are to them. Because these things are hard to stop. So you don't want to be hitting 5 irons and 6 irons at the pins. You got to really pick which, iron, which ones you're only going to do from a distance less than or equal to, basically. And also at the same time, you have to be really, really legit about your error bar. If your error is 4 yards, then you got to use an 8-yard diameter ring and hit to the middle of that. And make sure that the left edge doesn't, go into where you don't want to be. And if your variance is, 2 yards, you can use a 4-yard circle, right? And get it a little closer. But where you get dead is if your circle is smaller than your skill. And so the second discipline is to really assess your skill, not in ideal conditions, but at the emotional level you're able to attain. Okay, because in practice, I'm sure, your variance is 2 yards, fine. You can use a 4-yard circle. But when you're out there, under pressure, you're emotionally affected, you're not neutral, then that circle grows big. And otherwise, you'll end up on the wrong side of the pin, and you'll be, it just gets worse, right? It just cascades. So you have to constantly manage the diameter of your targets based on your emotional state. If you're Spock, they're at the standard diameters. Anything, any variance, including, feeling better, because then you hit the ball longer and all kinds of other stuff. You have to make those adjustments. So, I think those are the two biggest takeaways in terms of how to rethink through the problem of how do you go to the future, come back to the present, figure out what the game is in the future, and be smart about what you work on, because hitting the ball longer doesn't do it. It may win you at the third level, doesn't get you the next level, but you're going to have to deal with it sooner or later. And I think it's fortuitous and incredibly fortunate to have been to the future, so that the path navigating the layers up to the back up to the top is efficient and effective. Though it requires a bit of courage, right? Because you got to do things you've never done before. But that's why they built these layers, so that you discovered them. Because they only want the guys that have figured this stuff out. They don't want people flopping the ball on television. They're optimized to deliver a product. You look and play like a pro. Toughest golf courses in the world. And so they make you go do this. It's genius. I love it, And yes, there's a third component, which is putting. But there's no point really getting to that, because until you work out the driver thing, and then until you work out the approach thing at, spot neutral, or the drivers of how to get to spot neutral, the putting thing doesn't matter. Because otherwise, you're scrambling and you're making long putts for scores you don't want to be putting for, right? So you can put that off, I think, in the sequence, and start with the driver, and then the approaches, and just nailing that. And if you can achieve that by varying some gear, some psych neuro stuff, but mostly, just getting the ball in the fairway, because you're neutral, and just you can do it under any condition. Having eggs thrown at you, it just doesn't matter. You can just pop those out all day. That's the single biggest lever. And so, of course, where one would probably be tempted to just go start hitting the balls that way, I would start with the psychological drivers of neutrality first, or perhaps in parallel, because they are intimately connected. And one could easily give up and be able to master, accuracy, but then in competition it falls apart and they go back to their own old way, which is a mistake because they didn't solve it properly, right? They made the wrong choice. So you start with the drivers of the drive and see if you can drive the results to be, 80s plus 80% in the fairway. And you're solid. That's golden, right? That means 4 out of 5. And then the one other one, you're emotionally neutral, so you won't do anything silly, right? You'll just knock it in the green short stuff and get a par, because that's all you need. So that's my thoughts for this evening. I'm going to be working on this project this week and really starting to put some flesh around this framework. And I have, now a pretty good advisor for the swing mechanics. Another player. He's athletic. He's very talented. And he's also a student of the game. So I have that person to vet my, kind of mechanical swing stuff off of. I also have made a new friend in connection to a tour caddy who's helping me out brainstorm so that, I don't make any stupid conclusions, right? So he's offered for me to run stuff by him. And then yesterday I met someone that's super smart, master degree, trained thinker, which I think I need to enroll to help me vet the thinking part of all of this. Because, this stuff isn't on the YouTube, mainly because of the configuration of the entourage, right? They don't really pull it all together in these dimensions. So we're going into, like uncharted territory. But like most things, I mean, you just figure it out, right? That's how we get to Mars and the moon and ISS, the space station, and all that other stuff. So, yeah, that starts tomorrow. And so it is Sunday. And I had another friend get in touch with me this weekend about a very interesting problem of like kind of the art world and how all that works. And he's an artist, and he's kind of trying to figure out that whole space, And so I was going to tack it on to the end of this one, but I decided probably better do that in a separate video. So look forward to that. So it's The Art of Hunger, signing off.